Good morning. I'm Scott Kennedy. I'm director of the Project on Chinese Business and Political Economy here at CSIS in the Freeman Chair, and it's wonderful to have everyone to this exciting panel this morning on U.S.-Taiwan cooperation in the ICT sector. ICT, information and communications technologies, are critical, have been critical in Taiwan's economic development, and in the U.S.'s too. In fact, the economic success that Taiwan and the United States have had in ICT is not a coincidence. They are tightly connected to each other. At the same time, Taiwan's ITC sector and the U.S.'s are shaped by multiple dynamics. Some domestic, in the case of Taiwan, by cross-strait relations, global factors as well shape this industry. There are a lot of worries among some that the sector in Taiwan and in the U.S. has been hollowed out. I was just in Taiwan in late June for a week, looking at cross-strait economic relations and in ICT in particular, and the concerns that you read in the newspapers are things that you hear from people talking privately as well. This fear and concern about hollowing out and what it means for industry and high-tech industries has reached an apogee and is part of the political discussion in both places. Our future in ICT in the U.S. and in Taiwan is in doubt, and continued health of this sector, continued health of both economies requires not only unilateral actions by industries and governments, but also by partnerships at the commercial and other levels. Now, to shed light on this critical sector of the two economies and where things are headed, we've assembled a terrific panel of experts. We're going to first have introductory remarks by James Lee, the Deputy Representative for TECRO here in the U.S., and then we'll have an in-depth roundtable discussion with the rest of the guests, and I'll introduce them then. So let me first introduce Representative Lee, and then I'll follow on, allow him to come up and make opening remarks for today. You have everyone's bios, I hope, in the brochures that we provided when you came in, so I don't need to go into huge detail, but it's suffice to say that Representative Lee has an amazing wealth of experience in North America and Europe and elsewhere. He most recently served as representative in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if that's in The Hague. If it is, then that's an interesting town to have been in the last few weeks, of course, as everybody knows. And he previously was head of the European Affairs Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, early in his career, he was in Honolulu, was there for 8 years, and he had his MBA, got his MBA from University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I see a pattern of him being able to live in exciting places with good weather, which means that now he's achieving balance by being forced to move to Washington in the heat of the summer where temperatures are off the charts. So as things were good, now things are a little bit more challenging with the wonderful weather that we hear. But hopefully we're only a couple months away from things actually being much nicer. We're delighted that you could be with us here today. We're delighted for the partnership that we have with TECRO. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Representative James Lee.
Thank you for having me here today. I think Scott is right. If you are not in the Washington, D.C., you don't know how to define D.C. Before I came here, I think D.C. is, the capital of the United States. That's it. But after being here for 1 year, I think I redefined it as a place, a post, very demanding and very challenging. So that is my sentiment after 1 year's service here. Very different from my previous post in the Den Haag. It's a paradise. Well, thank you, Scott, for your kind introduction. and I'm delighted to see so many friends here today. And I would like to first to thank the CSIS for organizing this distinguished panel to discuss the U.S.-Taiwan commercial cooperation in the ICT sector. And I feel honored to be invited to make an opening remark. And I think according to the latest statistic of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Taiwan is one of the top 5 exporters of ICT goods in the world. And Taiwan continues to maintain the greatest global market share in terms of production value in 7 ICT product categories, including tablet, notebook, desktop, integrated circuit, server, LCDs, and digital cameras. Many of you might be using an iPhone 6, but you might not know that the chip processor and fingerprint sensor of the iPhone 6 are both made by Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company. I think Taiwan's ICT sector, while maintaining its unbeatable strengths, efficiency in manufacturing, it continued to push for innovation by emphasizing research and development. The recent statistic released by Taiwan Ministry of Science and Technology show that its R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP increasing to 3%, and almost 60% of it coming from the ICT industry. Last December, in the first U.S.-Taiwan Digital Economy Forum convened in Taipei, ranking officials from both sides come together to talk about our cooperation in promoting our global ICT industry, global supply chain, and facilitating the digital trade. And 2 months ago, in her inaugural speech, President Tsai Ing-wen vowed to transform Taiwan into an Asian Silicon Valley. With this strategic vision and this high-level dialogue mechanism in place, Taiwan looks forward to work closely and have formed a closer cooperation with the United States to help shape the future of ICT industry. And I think today's panel serves as an excellent platform to explore ideas on how our two sides can form a stronger partnership. In June 2015, Taiwan and the United States signed an MOU to establish the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, or GCTF, to facilitate our bilateral cooperation in responding to global challenge. Under this framework, Taiwan and the United States focus their already robust cooperation on 4 major areas: public health, women's empowerment, energy, and the ICT industry. This past year alone, together, we have already held several international training workshops on public health, such as Zika, dengue, and MERS, and the women empowerment workshops, and most recently, an energy efficiency conference. All these workshops were attended by experts and scholars or officials from ASEAN and other Asian countries. I'm pleased to see that today's panel will also discuss the prospect of the ICT cooperation in the GCTF, which will further our mutual strengths to help the third countries around the world. Let me share with you two anecdotes that might inspire the idea for future ICT cooperation in the GCTF. First, Taiwan, with the support of the United States, initiative the move to set up APEC Digital Opportunity Center in member economy in 2003, which has enabled millions of people to bridge the digital gap and improve their quality of life. And Taiwan commitment to this program remains strong and has already expanded to our allies in Latin America and Africa. Second, the State Department announced on the World Ocean Day last June that the global winner of the third annual Fishkathon's programming competition was the Akubic from Taiwan for their entry called Great Lakes Savior. The team Akubic addressed a problem submitted by the Fishery and Oceans Canada, what to do about the aquatic invasive species, formerly specifically the Asia carp, which present a major ecological and economic threat in the Great Lakes. And Team Akubic solution is to use the real-time online temperature data to predict the spawning time of the Asia carp in the Great Lake so they can control the population. So this may be an example how ICT can be applying to sustainable fishery. So I think, as you can tell, we do have a lot to talk about today. So without further ado, let me once again thank the CSIS for organizing this event, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Lee. We really appreciate your support, and you clearly know a lot about ICT. I'm sorry we don't have you as one of the panelists to ask you follow-up questions on all of these things, so we hope that this will be enlightening for you as well as the rest of the audience. So let me invite the panelists now to come up on stage, and we'll get started with the panel discussion. Let me, before we get started, let me introduce everyone. You don't know how lucky you are for the panel that we have, but I know at the end of this panel you'll realize it. We don't even charge admission, but we should, as a public think tank in Washington. First, to my far right is Lotta Danielson, who's the Vice President of the U.S.-Taiwan Business Council. She's been there since 2000. She's responsible for day-to-day operations of the Council, membership, and their research. That's a big portfolio, and we're excited that you're here with us today. To her immediate left is Chun Shin Hong, who is the Director and Research Fellow at the Chonghua Institute for Economic Research in Taipei. It's Taiwan's premier economics think tank. Shin Hong is a leading expert on ICT, innovation, and industrial clusters and other topics. He writes for a wide audience, academic, public policy. He also has spare time, I don't know how, to provide lectures at various universities around Taiwan, travels frequently. We're delighted that you've been able to make your way from Taipei to here today. To his immediate left is an old friend of mine, Doug Fuller, who's with the Zhejiang School of Management. He's an expert on the political economy of development and innovation with a focus on East Asia. And we're super lucky to have him here today because he's just released an extremely important book, Paper Tiger, Hidden Dragons, from Oxford University Press. It's not about that same topic the movie was about, but I think it's even more important. And hopefully we'll hear some of the findings today in the discussion that we're going to have. The book explains the pattern of successful and failed innovation in China with a heavy focus on ICT, and of course that's got huge implications for Taiwan and the United States. To his left, immediate left, is Jimmy Goodrich, who's the Vice President of Global Policy at the Semiconductor Industry Association. He's responsible for only covering the world, but in fact, East Asia and China in particular occupy a disproportionate amount of Jimmy's time. He previously worked at the Information Technology Industry Council, Cisco, and UCITO. He's perhaps the best informed person in Washington on Chinese ICT policies. And to cap it all off, he just became a new dad. So I don't know how that's going to affect his research time, but nevertheless, he has a new research assistant who will eventually help him with his work. And to my immediate right is Steve Lang, who's the Deputy U.S. Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy and Director of the International Communications and Information Policy Office in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs at the State Department. He's worked and served in a number of geographies, from Mexico to Mongolia, across Northeast Asia, Guangzhou, Taipei, Bangkok, and Cuba. He knows East Asia and China extremely well, but he knows the rest of the world in addition, so he'll be able to provide some comparative context as well for today's discussion. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. Again, we've got a terrific group. I'm going to open up things with questions for each of our panelists. I've done the sneaky thing of giving them the questions in advance, so it's going to look like they have just thought of these things and never heard any of this before, but in fact, there's been some advanced preparations, which I think actually is a good thing, because we're going to be able to really hear from them the things that they've been working on most over the past several years, and how they connect to this larger topic that we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to start with Lada from the U.S.-Taiwan Business Council, who follows U.S.-Taiwan business cooperation more intensively than just about anyone. So Lada, if you could talk about U.S.-Taiwan business cooperation, not just in ICT, but beyond over the last few decades. Where's this cooperation the strongest? Where's there been less momentum? Where do you see cooperation going?
Thank you very much, Scott. I am very happy to be here to represent the U.S.-Taiwan Business Council. Thank you to my panelists. This is going to be a very interesting discussion. When Scott first told me that he wanted me to talk about the 2 decades, I'm thinking to myself, 20 years, that's a really long time. But of course, I've been with the Council for 15 of them, so maybe it's not such a long time after all. Despite the complicated political situation surrounding Taiwan, U.S.-Taiwan trade and investment continues to grow. And that is, in conjunction with that trade, business cooperation also continues to deepen and to expand. Taiwan has evolved from a supplier of cheap goods to a U.S. export market and a production partner, and to now being seen by U.S. companies as a partner for innovation, which Deputy Representative Lee also mentioned, as a stepping stone to Asia as well. Taiwan continues to be an export market and a trading partner for U.S. companies in the technology sector and in others as well. Taiwan imports, for example, high value-added components as inputs for high-tech manufacturing from leading U.S. companies like Applied Materials, for example. Once Taiwan joined the World Trade Organization in 2002 and the WTO Government Procurement Agreement in 2009, there were even better conditions for U.S. exports to Taiwan and for bilateral trade in general. Taiwan has also served as a very important production partner for U.S. businesses. It's long been a major global center for production, and many U.S. manufacturers have had plants in Taiwan for a long time. IBM, DuPont, 3M have all been in Taiwan since the 50s and 60s. Other companies like Micron, Ford, Procter & Gamble are also in Taiwan. And I will specifically mention Corning. Corning has been in Taiwan since 1971. They have two of the world's largest glass display facilities, both based in Taiwan. And actually, Taiwan is the largest foreign investment by DuPont anywhere in the U.S., in the company's 150-year history. But that goes both ways as well. U.S. businesses are production partners for Taiwan companies as well. There are about 600 Taiwan companies with investments in the U.S. They have about 12,000 workers in technology, in agriculture, in biotech, in financial services. I went to school in South Carolina, and one of the largest production centers for plastics is in South Carolina, Nanya Plastics, which is part of the Formosa Plastics Group, one of Taiwan's largest conglomerates. And they have had their plant there since 1990. I think also Taiwan tech companies that have investments in the US concludes Foxconn, Acer, Mytek, Asus, and of course the semiconductor companies TSMC and UMC. In addition to their production locations, these companies also have various investments, capital venture investments in the US, including in US startups. But in addition to being a production partner in an export market, Taiwan is increasingly becoming an innovation partner for US companies. Many Taiwan technology companies made their start as OEM and ODM producers for Taiwan brands, but the last decade had seen more and more deepening cooperation between US and Taiwan companies. The U.S. has taken advantage of Taiwan as a tech cluster, as a an important production partner in the technology supply chain, as well as utilizing the tech expertise, the engineering capabilities, and the creativity of the Taiwan labor force. And Taiwan companies, of course, get access to U.S. leading-edge technology. In the last decade, we've had tremendous changes in the consumer market in favor of mobility. This was a challenge for Taiwan because their PC market has always been their flagship sector, and it's been tough for them to sort of switch gears. And the PC market has been in decline, in particular, since 2012, and now the smartphone and tablet markets are softening as well. So where do we go next? The Taiwan government and business leaders recognize the need to make changes to improve the ecosystem for new technologies and for true technology partnerships. The new government of President Tsai Ing-wen is focused on the 5 innovative industries. So that includes defense, green energy, biotechnology, smart machinery, and Internet of Things. And among other things, as Deputy Representative Lee mentioned, they want to continue to develop Taiwan into an Asia Silicon Valley, which it already is to a certain extent, but they will continue to expand that for the future. They also want to change the current production paradigm towards an Industry 4.0 with an emphasis on smart manufacturing. So business partnerships are also seeing this sort of move towards innovation and internet-enabled technology. We're looking at things like IoT, cloud, virtual reality, wearables, et cetera. And I wanted to give a couple of examples of these. So you talked about R&D. HP, Dell, IBM, DuPont, Microsoft, they've all established research and development centers in Taiwan, and there are several other US companies as well. They're driving innovation, not just in Taiwan, but also for their global and their Asia operations. So Google, IBM, and Microsoft have all established cloud computing centers in Taiwan. Facebook and Apple are looking as well at Taiwan as a center for global cloud computing. Even a Hollywood special effects firm is running its animation and visual effects cloud processing in Taiwan. Taiwan server companies like Hanhai, Inventec, and Quanta are working with Amazon and Google on big data processing. There's cooperation on digital content, so Chinese language software, applications, gaming, esports. I don't know if you know about Amazon-owned Twitch, which is a gaming broadcaster, and they're actually targeting Taiwan as one of their major markets in Asia. There's cooperation on financial technology. US companies are working with Taiwan companies and Taiwan banks on mobile payment apps, digital wallets, that sort of thing. Wearables, of course, is also another momentum. Smart textiles, smart watches, smart jewelry. I'm wearing a Pebble watch right now. Pebble is a US company that is doing their development and their design as well as their production in Taiwan. Of particular interest is the nascent virtual reality segment for graphics, connectors and components, advanced chips, but also for virtual reality applications, going beyond entertainment and going in towards healthcare and manufacturing, that sort of thing. The Taiwan-produced HTC Vive, which is built in cooperation with US gaming company Valve, sits at the very forefront of the virtual reality wave. And if you haven't tried the Vive, I would highly recommend it. It's quite fantastic. So those are the companies and the businesses that have sort of momentum. Where are we seeing less momentum? Well, legacy tech products, traditional PC components, maybe LCD panels, something that's not cutting edge. And that's because I think both US and Taiwan companies are looking to other partners, such as China, Malaysia, Thailand, et cetera. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Terrific. That's an excellent overview of both economies and recent trends. I'm going to turn now to Shinhong, and actually there might be a little bit of overlap here, because I wanted to ask you basically two interconnected questions which follow from what Lotte presented, which is first, you know, in your mind, sort of what are the key dynamics or you know, most important features of ICT in Taiwan? And secondly, could you talk about the triangular relationship between the U.S., Taiwan, and mainland China? And Lotte briefly referred to China, but how it's actually shaping the sector as a whole and what it means for companies in Taiwan is something that has got to be critically important to where Taiwan is headed as well.
Thank you, Ken. Scott. I came all the way from Taiwan and stay here just one night for this conference. I will head back to Taiwan in the afternoon. But it seemed to me that it's worthwhile for me to do so. At least I got the chance to speak for Taiwan. What I'm about to say is my own personal opinion. Regarding to Scott's first question, I think for the last few decades, the United States have been a dominant player in the ICT industry. In conjunction with this, a defining characteristic of Taiwanese ICT industry is that many of Taiwanese ICT firms are kingmakers. You simply look at the case, lots of cases. For example, right from the Intel, Microsoft, HP, Dell, Visual, they all benefit a lot from Taiwanese supply chain and design and R&D functions. Also, when Apple became a strong player in the smartphone area, there was some in-joke in the industrial communities that no jobs, no jobs. Obviously, the first jobs refers to Steve Jobs. You see, so that imply the close relationship between the rise of the Apples in smartphone and Taiwan's accumulated strength. More recently, you look at the case of Tesla. When Tesla was a nobody in the electric vehicle industry, the company actually went to Taiwan to seek lots of Taiwanese component technology. So eventually, now it's become a significant player in the emerging electric vehicle industries. A few years ago, I worked with European commissions on a project about Taiwan's ICT industry. At that time, they raised a question about growing ICT R&D gap between the United States and European unions. The gap was about 38 billion euros as of 2008. But I talked to them, if you look at the close relationship between Taiwan and even India and the United States, you may find that the gap between US and Europe actually could be much larger, wider than the statistics suggested, because the United States has done a better job in leveraging the R&D strengths in East Asia, especially Taiwan and India. So I think the relationship between Taiwan and the United States is not just manufacturing muscle. In many cases, Taiwan has been part of the R&D partner to the US major players. So it's gives rise to the so-called global production network and global innovation network. This has been the major characteristics in the ICT sectors, in which Taiwan has played an important role. In the formation of the global production network and innovation network, a lot of industrial players from different countries and operating in different locations work closely together in designing the products, in even producing and delivering the product to the end market. So this, with this process, Taiwanese ICT firms become quite internationalized. Initially, they made our investment to Southeast Asia. But as for the rise of China as a major economic manufacturing powerhouse, a lot of Taiwanese firms were driven by their branded customer to invest in mainland China. Once I heard from top managers of Foxconn, they say that it's easy for them to decide where to invest, because as long as the customer want them to invest, they will go there. So if you look at the relationship between Taiwanese firms and their American counterpart, you may see that it is the American customer who sits at the driver's seat when it comes to the investment location, offshore investment location for Taiwanese ICT firms. So this gives us to all the so-called triangular relationships between Taiwan, China, and the United States. Nowadays, you can see that in terms of production and export, Taiwan tend to focus on the so-called high-end intermediate goods, because a lot of components or parts have been localized within mainland China, become part of the so-called Chinese indigenous supply chains. Because the scale of the multinational operations in mainland China becomes so substantial, so a lot of Taiwanese firms got to invest a lot in mainland China. But still, there are some cases that Taiwanese firms work together with the US firms in different ways. For example, recently I heard a case that a Taiwanese company called Heda actually now is working together with Tesla to set up manufacturing operations in United States in order to serve the local market in America. So I think the relationship becomes more complicated, partly because the market force becomes or market size becomes a major factors in determining the location of Taiwanese operations. So that's why we need to look at the close relationship between Taiwan and Americans in the more dynamic ways, Before, we used to focus on the so-called cost down to reduce the production cost. Simply try to come to terms with the decreasing profit rate, the margins in the ICT industry. But now the market factor become more the significant in defining the so-called new partnership between Taiwan and the United States. So I guess that's what I wanted to say for the first time. Thank you.
Terrific. Shin-Hong, that was fantastic, extremely helpful. We're going to turn now, the next two commenters are going to try and put the bilateral relationship in context, first regionally and then second through looking at one specific sector. So I'm going to turn now to Doug from Zhejiang University, who's just written this book on innovation and in China. And the China part of the equation obviously is extremely important. So that leads to the question, to what extent are Chinese high-tech companies really becoming competitive in technologies where Taiwanese companies have been successful? To what extent is that more a competitive relationship than the cooperative one, which it seems to have been over the past decade plus? And to what extent has Taiwan investment in China helped contribute to the creation of successful Chinese companies, which then may end up displacing Taiwanese companies? So let me leave there. That's a lot to ask.
Okay, thanks, Scott. On these two questions of the rising Chinese competition and then how Taiwan contributed that, there's actually a very particular story in the IC industry, the semiconductor industry, but I'm not going to talk about that right now since that's Jimmy's bailiwick for the presentation, but maybe later on I'll add 2 cents about that. But if we look at the competition from mainland China in ICT vis-a-vis the Taiwanese firms, I think the big firms we think about when we think about China, a lot of them are not in the same areas. So Huawei, probably I would argue the most legitimate, technologically sophisticated IT industry firm from the mainland. At least originally, they were focused on telecommunication infrastructure equipment. This isn't an area where Taiwan has had a lot of strength. So that's not really a competitive dynamic there. In fact, Huawei, albeit sort of quasi-secretly, even has R&D operations in Taiwan. I think they still don't admit it, but they are there. So there's no sort of competition there. And another area would be, of course, all the sort of web-based services where there's these large Chinese firms, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba. Part of that, their dominance may be due, arguably, to regulatory and other protection inside China, but Taiwan hasn't really been that successful in developing those type of firms in any case. So that's not an area of competition either. The main area is sort of in the computing realm. But even here, I would argue that the Chinese firms aren't as competitive as one would think. So in computing, you typically think of Lenovo in China. This is a very large firm in terms at least of computing, personal computing volumes. They're the largest firm in the world. But there's a lot of weakness in Lenovo once you look beyond just the sheer size of the firm. And here, I guess I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about the history. So when Lenovo before it bought IBM's PC division in 2004, Lenovo was basically extremely reliant on Taiwanese ODM suppliers. And they weren't reliant on these firms in the same way that HP or Dell or Toshiba were reliant on those firms. Because for the large branded firms from Japan or North America, they also had a lot of input into the design of these computer products. But Lenovo was basically sort of taking off-the-shelf products. Then they bought IBM. For a while, it looked that they were going to become a very serious competitor. In fact, in the initial years after they bought IBM, in terms of price per computer, they were ranked very, very high vis-a-vis the major international competitors. But over time, Lenovo sort of misutilized this asset they'd bought from IBM. And their price per computer actually has been in quite severe decline compared to their competitors. Even their competitors from Taiwan, like ASUS and Acer. Typically, I think these days, people assume that Acer isn't very successful. But if you're looking at margins and price points, they're actually doing better than Lenovo. And I would argue a big part of that is Lenovo, after this big splash of internationalizing through acquisition, has quite heavily retreated to the Chinese market. They're still very heavily reliant on a market where prices are quite low. If Lenovo has a competitive advantage, it's probably in its channels. It's very extensive channels throughout China. It's really dominant in the Chinese countryside, but there the price points are even lower. So what looks like a strength for China is actually arguably a weakness. And lo and behold, these days they still have gone back and are reliant on Taiwanese firms like Compal to make a lot of their computers, particularly the more sophisticated notebook computers. Recently in China, there's been a very large push to get into the server market. Lenovo, again, bought an IBM asset. They're sort of the low to mid-range server asset of IBM. You have Inspur, you have Dawning, two other server makers in China. And the government is sort of explicitly trying to encourage procurement from these server makers and not outsiders. But again, once you sort of peel off the labels and look what's inside, none of these firms, with the possible exception of, with the exception of Lenovo, are really capable of making these products. Inspur and Dawning are very reliant on their suppliers from Taiwan. They want to learn from them, are trying to learn from them. But if the past is any guide, it's going to take them a very long time if they ever actually get that far. Now they may still dominate the Chinese market because a lot of that is direct or indirect government procurement. So if the Chinese government doesn't want to have the foreign firms compete, well, then they won't be able to compete there. But here again, I think there's still a fair amount of space for these Taiwanese ODM manufacturers to do well. Turning away from the competition aspects to look at cooperation across the Taiwan Strait. I'm not going to talk about today, obviously. With the new government, I think the chances of a lot of cooperation in the IT industry are quite limited. But even under the Ma administration, there were attempts, but they basically failed. So there was this industry cooperation committee that held a lot of meetings between the two sides and decided to try to foster cooperation in LED lighting, in wireless cities, and in cold storage for food. And in all three areas, basically, not much worked out. Probably cold storage was the most successful. The Taiwanese did get the Xiamen government to sort of do a fast-track process for customs so they could bring their agricultural produce into China very quickly essentially before it rotted. But otherwise, there was always a tension between the Taiwanese wanting to maintain control of their technology and hopefully make some money in the Chinese market, and on the Chinese side, the Chinese wanting to promote local firms and or to sort of absorb Taiwanese technology. So even under the Ma's administration, typically looked at as a much more pro-China administration, cooperation failed. And the other major area was LCDs. In 2009, the Chinese government was quite anxious to have cooperation with Taiwan, seeing Taiwan being able to provide LCD technology in the television market. But the Taiwanese government was very reluctant to have cutting-edge production. At that point, 8.5 generation LCD panels moved to China. The problem was there are other manufacturers out there in the world. The Koreans were much more willing to move production to China, and in the case of Beijing Oriental Electronics, to sell technology and production lines to a Chinese firm. So by dragging their feet, the Taiwanese in this case, by dragging their feet, they really lost out on maintaining a leading position in that field. Then finally, back to the last question, what has Taiwanese investment done to promote competitors in China? What I think is interesting here is there are some Taiwanese firms that have really embraced sort of a dual headquarters role, like Inventec. That firm calls it their twin tower approach, where they're sort of equally or want to be equally Taiwanese and Chinese. So they have a lot of resources in China and are putting a lot of R&D in China. The various groups under, various firms under the Honghai Group are extremely active in China, not just in manufacturing, but there's a tremendous amount of R&D. If you just look at US patent data, you can see that. So there are significant Taiwanese firms that are doing a lot of R&D in China, and through training personnel, helping China to develop. But with maybe the exception of the semiconductor industry, which I won't talk about right now, you haven't really seen very direct fostering of local competitors in China. And I would say that goes back to problems with financial allocation and industrial policy in China. If you want to know more, you can read my book, which is basically about those issues. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott and Jimmy.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Yes, a terrific book. So encourage everyone there. Jimmy, I guess what I'm hearing for Doug is that for the most part, the rise of China in ICT, or their participation, has largely been win-win, that the areas where the Chinese are developing aren't the areas where the Taiwanese have been strong, although there's some levels of, some difficulties from Taiwan companies getting access to certain parts of the Chinese market because of domestic procurement and other policies or whatever. Doug hinted that semiconductors is different, and but I'm wondering really how different. I did see in the newspaper this morning that Tsinghua Unigroup just acquired, or is about to acquire, XMC because they want to move up in memory. This is just one of many investments that the Chinese are making in semiconductors. To what extent is in this area, ought there be, is there more tension? And we know that the Taiwan authorities have had a variety of constraints or conditions related to semiconductor investment in China. And to what extent has that been effective or generated unexpected problems?
Well, thanks, Scott. I think we've talked a lot, just about every panel so far has mentioned the semiconductor industry, and just stepping back a little bit and looking at not only China, but the linkage between the United States and Taiwan and the semiconductor industry is significant. A lot of people forget, despite all the rhetoric over the last couple of weeks in the campaign, we still make things here in the United States. For example, semiconductors are the third largest manufactured export out of the United States after automobiles and airplanes. So there's still a significant amount of manufacturing and design. The United States is the world leader in the semiconductor industry in terms of sales revenue. And our supply chains and our customers are worldwide. 80% of our customers are overseas, and more than 50% of the inputs into things that we make, the stuff that we design, are from locations around the world. And our industry is worldwide in terms of its manufacturing footprint as well. And Taiwan is one of the most significant destinations for export of parts of the supply chain and also a partner in production, as Lotte as well mentioned. And Taiwan is a leader in some of the areas of the semiconductor industry today. For example, in semiconductor manufacturing, Taiwan has the single largest share of installed capacity for semiconductor manufacturing, surpassing Korea, Japan, and the United States to be 22% of worldwide semiconductor manufacturing. And that really supports the U.S. semiconductor industry, as many U.S. semiconductor companies are fabless. They don't themselves have manufacturing facilities. This was a model that actually was pioneered in Taiwan by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, founded by Morris Chang, who actually started his career in the United States working for U.S. semiconductor companies. And so companies that we hear of today that are engaging in innovative technology breakthroughs like artificial intelligence, NVIDIA, a lot of the chips that they make, for example, that will be powering your autonomous vehicle, are manufactured in TSMC, or Google's newest artificial intelligence processing chip, the Tensor sensor, was also manufactured at TSMC. And of course, everyone today has mentioned the fact that Apple's in-house designed microprocessor is manufactured at TSMC as well. And there's other foundries as well in the Taiwan market. But so there's a lot of trade between the U.S. and Taiwan in the semiconductor industry, given its role in the fabless foundry sector. But there's also a lot of export of U.S. semiconductor equipment. It's the second largest manufactured good from the United States to Taiwan, are coming from companies like Applied Materials, Lam Research, KLA Technologies, all headquartered in the United States, manufactured in the United States, exporting to Taiwan. And so there's a huge amount of linkage. And the third of that, of course, some of the largest U.S. FDI into Taiwan are coming from semiconductor companies. Micron Technologies is in the process of acquiring a major Taiwan semiconductor firm called Inotera Memories for $4.8 billion. One of the largest inbound FDI deals into Taiwan is coming from the U.S. in the semiconductor industry as well. So there's a tremendous amount of linkages across the supply chain. I think without the Taiwanese semiconductor industry, the United States would not be successful in the innovation that we have today. And also without competition from Taiwan, that's market-based, that's following market-based competition, companies like Intel and others would not be also pushing the boundaries of innovation and limits that they are today. But there's certainly challenges to that looking forward. Of course, we've talked about China. There's also organic changes happening within our industry. What's powered the growth of semiconductors has been something called Moore's Law. Not really a technological concept, but an economic concept where, because of advances in technology, we can double the amount of transistors and have the cost of a chip in roughly 12 to 18 months. We actually just published a study that is more or less aligned with consensus that Moore's Law is not dead, but it's slowing down. And so because of that, the industry is looking for new ways to propel innovation to the future. And is also, we've dwelled upon here, the traditional sources of growth for the semiconductor industry, the PC sector, the smartphone sector, are saturated or slowing. And so there's a strive for looking at new sources of technological growth, like the Internet of Things, autonomous computing, autonomous driving, and AI, et cetera. But China as well is making a massive push in the semiconductor industry. for decades, as Doug's research has pointed out, has been kind of a laggard in the semiconductor industry despite massive investments or significant industrial policy pushes from the Chinese state. And that's really been for financial reasons and also poor planning. But in 2014, the central government in China, looking to change that equation, announced a new plan with $160 billion of funding. It's one of the single largest funded industrial policy initiatives that the central government has for any sector, period. And as part of that, they've been engaging in a very rapid effort to buy as much IP and technology as possible, to also invest in their own companies, but also be very pragmatic about that. And to date, we've seen a lot of openness by leaders in China to partner with leaders in the industry from Taiwan, from Korea, from the United States to help them grow their domestic capabilities. And so since this new plan has come out in 2014, every single major Taiwanese semiconductor company has increased their investments in mainland China. TSMC is opening a $3.5 billion manufacturing facility in Nanjing. PowerChip is opening a $2 billion facility in Hefei. UMC is opening a $3 billion facility in Xiamen. MediaTek is also selling a $600 million business unit of theirs to a Chinese partner. And this really has been a consensus by the global industry that China has made it explicitly clear that they want to have a semiconductor industry. And increasingly, there's a notion that you have to pay to play to be part of the China market. And so you see a challenge not only within Taiwan, but also within the United States about how to maintain competitiveness, how to maintain market access when, for companies like MediaTek, 50% of their customers are Chinese headquartered smartphone vendors. And so how do they maintain competitiveness, protect their IP, but also maintain access to the fastest and most important market for these companies is a challenge that we have together. And there's actually many things that we can do, I think, working with Taiwan to help maintain the competitiveness of our sector, the semiconductor industry, from maintaining the linkages, looking at trade policy. Taiwan's doing a number of smart things like investing in education. The new government's talking about investing in semiconductor research and development, has set up a new integrated circuits innovation and R&D alliance in partnership with industry and government. These are all smart things that Taiwan should be doing to maintain this industry, because what Taiwan has in terms of education and talent and research is something that to date mainland China does not in the semiconductor industry. And then finally, the rule of law and intellectual property protection is critical in that in the semiconductor industry, we have the highest percentage of our revenues reinvested back into research and development. Roughly 19% of our profits are plowed back into research. And that research is usually in the form of a trade secret or patents, but actually largely in semiconductor manufacturing, it's in trade secrets. And Taiwan recently updated its trade secrets protection law. And that's a major issue, certainly for the industry, and very important, given that at the same time, Taiwan has seen a huge increase in trade secrets theft in the semiconductor industry. And so with that, I'll conclude my remarks and happy to talk about some of these on the discussion.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Jimmy. Extremely informative, helpful, and I think we've got a nice chain of conversation going on here, and we're going to wrap up the initial conversation with Steve, who's from the State Department. So, you know, as I mentioned before, you've served in a lot of different geographies, but now you sit in an incredibly important position within the office in the State Department that thinks about information and communication technologies for the U.S. from a strategic perspective. How does what you've heard so far and also your experience, you know, make you think about U.S.-Taiwan cooperation in ICT? Where might we promote additional cooperation? Representative Lee mentioned the U.S.-Taiwan Global Cooperation and Training Framework Agreement. Is that where you would focus, or, you know, and in addition to that, where else would you place attention?
Okay. Boy, that's louder. All right, great. These include things like digital trade, cross-border payment systems, connectivity, expanding connectivity around the world. We are very happy that that event was a success and look forward to holding our next one, and we are planning to hold our next Digital Economy Forum before the end of the year. And I think that's a useful venue for future cooperation between us. But I do also want to highlight, as Scott mentioned, and I was also very happy to hear Deputy Representative Lee highlight as well, the global cooperation and training framework. As Deputy Representative Lee mentioned, we've had some very successful programs, particularly in the areas of health and women's empowerment and energy security. But I think that ICT is another area with a lot of potential for cooperation there. And I think the GCTF is important in particular because Taiwan has a lot of experience, valuable experience and knowledge that it can share with its partners around the world, with its neighbors. It's really an impressive model of a vibrant democracy, of a successful economy, and has a lot to share. One area that my office is particularly interested in working with Taiwan is in expanding connectivity. The State Department has a relatively new initiative called the Global Connect Initiative that was launched by Undersecretary Kathy Novelli last September in New York with the goal of bringing the stakeholders from around the world together to bring another 1.5 billion people online by 2020. And I think that's an area where Taiwan has expertise and valuable experience that it could share with others around the world. So I think there is a lot of potential there for us to work together and a lot of challenging issues that my fellow panelists have mentioned. So we are very excited to continue exploring those opportunities.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm just going to use the prerogative of the chair to ask one more question, and I invite anyone on the panel to respond. But I want to give our audience a chance to ask questions and offer comments as well, which is an important CSIS tradition. And I want to go actually just a little bit beyond ICT, if we could. As was mentioned, the Thai government has identified 5 innovative sectors. Taiwan is known for ICT, and it's known in advanced technologies almost exclusively for ICT relative to others. So if you look at these other industries that have been identified, biotech, green energy, I guess the Internet of Things is connected to ICT, precision, machinery, defense. What has it been about the ICT experience in Taiwan, the cooperation with the U.S., the global supply chains, that could be adapted to these other sectors? Or is there something about ICT in particular that's distinctive that makes the transfer of that type of model more challenging for Taiwan collaboration with the United States? Or should we be optimistic that if invest as much energy, ingenuity in these other sectors, that the prospects for those are as equally high? Let's start with Jimmy.
Scott, I can add, and I think others might have some thoughts on this as well. I think one of the biggest factors that has contributed to Taiwan's success, at least in the semiconductor industry, and potentially others, has been human capital flows. If you look at the executives across the Taiwanese semiconductor industry or other parts of the Taiwanese tech sector, virtually all of them have spent, or a large percentage, a decade or plus, or spent their early careers working for U.S. companies in the United States. And so they have those personal relationships, they have knowledge of the industry, and they've won trust of the suppliers or the customers they then work with once they come back to Taiwan. So that's, I think, been one of the major successes of the Taiwanese industry, and that's stemming from the close relationship that Taiwan and the United States have had over the last couple of decades. I think looking forward at other sectors, The new MOEA minister has been talking about the 5 industries that Madam Tsai has also highlighted, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology. There's also talk of setting up a $3 billion industry innovation fund. I think that right now that's just a plan. I think as you know, Taiwan might be able to look at areas where they can leverage their experience in manufacturing excellence. Biotechnology is one of those where you rely on volume manufacturing, but the space, power, resources are definitely limited within Taiwan to even expand its current manufacturing footprint. South Korea, Samsung in particular, if you look at all of its new investments, they're in batteries, biopharma, and industry. So they have, Taiwan's not the only country, particularly in East Asia, that's looking at those same technologies for their next stage of development. So I'll stop there and maybe others have thoughts on that.
Just now, Doc mentioned that Taiwan and China are competing in different areas. But to some extent, that means that one can be the victim of its own success. We used to excel in traditional ICT products, notebook computing and smartphone. But we see nowadays some new development, even in the broadly defined ICT areas. A lot of panelists talk about the autonomous driving, even IoT, and even AI. So that's I always argue that Taiwan needs to diversify, especially even in the semiconductor area. We still need to diversify. Lots of Taiwanese IC products are really related to the traditional ICT products. In our effort of diversification, we need to engage with international partners. When you look at a lot of Taiwanese firms, they are in fact different from their previous base in Taiwan. Delta, we used to consider Delta as a company in the so-called power supplies area. But now you look at the business sectors, business operation of the company, they are involved in green energy. They are involving in even the so-called electric, the automated electronics. But most of the operations are in elsewhere outside Taiwan, because they need to engage with the local strengths or local advantages there. So what I want to suggest that even Taiwan needs to diversify. We simply cannot do it on our own. We need to work together with international partners. So our involvement in the so-called innovation cycle could be at an early stage, rather than just the so-called commercialization and production stages. In addition, just now, Steve talked about the so-called global cooperation training framework. I think to some extent we can do something other than just the workshop under which Taiwan provides some knowledge to share with other countries. If you want us to set up some kinds of platform for lots of players from Taiwan and US to work together, something can be done through these kinds of GCTF. So instead just of providing training courses to other countries, there could be some kinds of training or dialogues of platform for both sides to work together. So there are still other areas of work for people to work hard and to enhance the mutual relationship between the two sides. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot. Does others want to comment on this, and then I'm going to turn it to the floor? Yeah, Lada, and then Doug.
So I just wanted to say, obviously Taiwan has worked on certain of these technologies. So biotechnology, that's something that they've been focused on for quite a while, and they've had some challenges in developing that within Taiwan. There are some things, though, I think that they can learn from their ICT experience. So the science park model has been very successful in Taiwan, and I think that that's where the Thai government is trying to focus both defense and on biotech, and moving it throughout Taiwan, not just in Hsinchu and in Taipei. And I also think that we can leverage the technology that they have already, like Jimmy said, the human resources. But I also think that one thing that they need to think about is how the regulatory environment in Taiwan can be adjusted, especially if they want to try to go for the TPP membership. How can that be sort of part of how they change the regulatory framework and the policies internally in Taiwan, and try to build on that as well?
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, just to build on and maybe push a little bit further than Jimmy and Lada did on biotech or biopharma, to make it larger. I'm quite skeptical that this will work out for Taiwan, just because the scale of investment needed. Where Taiwan has done well, they've typically been able to divvy up the value chain and invest small amounts of money. They succeeded in the semiconductor industry at a time when you needed a lot less money than you do today. And as Jimmy already mentioned, the Koreans, I think, are way ahead of Taiwan in building up their biopharma industry. The one area that may make sense for them, the wider area, is medical equipment, because that's closely related to abilities they already have in the IT industry. I think a more interesting area for them potentially is the smart manufacturing, the Industry 4.0. There's a large debate right now is who's going to win Industry 4.0. It's going to be the Germans who came up with the term and are, the traditional machinery powerhouse, or is it going to be somebody else the problem the Germans have, arguably, is they've never been very good at software. I think that's the hope of the U.S. and other countries, is that maybe they're not as good at the machinery aspects as the Germans, but much better on the software side. And Taiwan potentially could also play a role in this area. It does have this machinery industry, and although software has not been its strength per se, I think it's more attuned because of its IT industry to designing in for software requirements.
Okay, terrific. Thank you all. I think it helps to put this sector in the context of other sectors as well. All right, we've had an extremely fruitful debate. Everyone in the audience has been amazingly patient. Since we have about 10 minutes or so left, I think if we've got a lot of questions, what we'll do is we'll just collect a series and then let the panelists respond as they'd like. So please raise your hand, after I call on you, identify yourself, and keep your comment to a question and a question as opposed to multiple questions. So who would like to go first? Yes, the gentleman in the fourth row. Excuse me. And we have microphone.
Hi, Eric Altbach of the Albright Stonebridge Group. We have the privilege of representing clients in both China and Taiwan. And I used to work at USTR covering U.S.-Taiwan trade issues. The presentations have been terrific, and many of you have noted the Tsai administration's interest in expanding Taiwan's existing strengths in high technology, higher value-added sectors. Obviously, Taiwan can't compete in terms of the incentives it offers foreign partners to deepen cooperation and investment in Taiwan. It can't compete with the resources that the government can provide to finance these activities, but it can compete in having very high quality human capital, a best, world-class regulatory environment, IP protection regimes, and facilitating trade and investment and industrial partnerships by addressing the concerns that motivate foreign companies as they decide which jurisdictions and which partners they have to choose from in the context of a variety of incentives, pressures, strong arming in some cases, as we see in China. But the question is Taiwan prepared to take the steps to address the regulatory concerns? You know, there's been dramatic improvement in IP protections. That's terrific. But there are many regulatory issues. There are many concerns about the provincial character of Taiwan regulatory agencies. There's some questions about whether Taiwan can handle the complex competition policy questions, IP competition policy nexus, which can be very challenging, and some cases have arisen in China that have raised real anxieties for foreign companies. So when we're talking about collaboration in high technology, these are absolutely critical. Taiwan's new leadership, I think, is very focused on that. Can they do it? Can they motivate the regulatory agencies that like to move at their own pace with their own unique characteristics to understand that you cannot succeed unless you make dramatic, rapid improvements to create the kind of environment that foreign companies need and want if they're going to deepen their partnerships?
All right. Thank you. I misspoke before. We actually have until noon, so we're not quite as under pressure. But thank you for the comment, Eric. Others with questions or comments? Yes, gentleman right here. We've got a microphone we can give you since for our audience on all four corners of the planet who are tuning in.
Sure. Russell Shao with GTI. My question is going to be brief. It's the panelists have done a fantastic job in outlining why Taiwan is the powerhouse that it is. The question I have is, how do the panelists, and this is for all the panelists to address whomever wants to, is what does Taipei want to see U.S. do from a policy perspective that can help it maintain the sort of competitive edge that it now enjoys? And what does Washington want to see Taipei do to help it maintain this type of competitive edge that it enjoys in this sector? And so this is just from like sort of a two-side perspective.
Right. Anyone want to take comment on the comment?
I can maybe take a little stab at that and also partly address Eric's question as well, which is, I think from the perspective of the U.S. technology industry, particularly semiconductor industry as well, we've seen an increasing pattern of the Taiwanese government willing to take a greater leadership role on some of the issues that are important to us, like trade policy. If you look at, for example, early on, Taiwan was very willing to join something called the World Semiconductor Council and the government and authorities meetings on semiconductors, which is an annual summit that Taiwan, South Korea, Europe, the United States, Japan, and China participate in to talk about market access and trade policy for the global semiconductor industry. And Taiwan has taken a leadership role. In particular, they've been able to make tough decisions with their domestic constituents to help promote international trade. Most recently, they really struggled, but also at the end of the day, took a leadership role domestically to help expand something called the Information Technology Agreement, which is a WTO plurilateral agreement that has been a significant contributor to IT growth by enabling all tech products under that agreement to trade at zero tariff. And most recently, it was agreed and implemented on July 1st that will be expanded to 200 types of new products. And there was a lot of debate and discussion in capitals around the world, including in Taipei, around what should be in and what should be out. And ultimately, Taiwan became a strong proponent of this, for this agreement, even though it did not include something that was dear to their heart, flat panel displays, but included a lot of next generation semiconductor products, machinery, tools. And Taiwan was very active in Geneva, was active within other organizations like APEC and others to help promote this trade agreement, even though they had domestic opposition for some of the industrial sectors that weren't promoted. So this is one area where I think the global industry wants to see Taiwan be more active within the WTO, within other regions to help promote trade in ICT, and we've been seeing Taiwan take a very active role in doing so. And I think that's important for in the future when and if Taiwan looks at something like the TPP. So thank you.
That's super helpful.
Sure.
Steve?
Thanks. And I'm definitely not going to try to address the question of what would Taiwan like to see the United States do. But from the perspective of the United States and the things that we would like to see Taiwan do, I think Eric raised some important questions about regulatory environment in Taiwan, and there are, I think, a variety of concerns in that area, a lot of which get out of the area of expertise that I work in on communication and information policy. But I think one of the reasons our Digital Economy Forum back in December was useful was because we had a very valuable exchange on questions of what are the types of regulatory frameworks that encourage innovation and growth, and the counterparts that we were working with to arrange it. The delegation from Taiwan was led by the Ministry of, or the National Development Council. And I think from their perspective, there was a lot of interest in hearing from us about our regulatory approach to a variety of issues within communication and information policy. So I think that's an exchange we would like to continue to address some of those concerns.
Shinho?
I think the ICT landscape is on a way of paradigm shift. Somehow we got to deal not just about production innovation. We also have to deal with new regulatory issues. So that's why a lot of panelists talk about this regulatory issue. So I guess what the US can do is not just, probably you can work together with Taiwan to address some regulatory issue. I remember in the TPP's agreement, they talk about the so-called regulatory assessments exercise. So somehow I think that these kinds of things may help Taiwanese government and even the industry to come to terms with the new regulatory environment. In addition, I think that would a lot of people may think on the surface Taiwan is quite small in terms of markets. But if you look at some specific areas, Taiwan can provide some demanding needs in terms of innovation. For example, in the cybersecurity, Taiwan has been faced with major cyber attacks from the Chinese side. So it's quite demanding in terms of technological innovation. So I think both sides can work together on this issue. Apart from that, we have to deal with the so-called green energies, like a lot of countries is facing. So now the government want to open up the so-called offshore green energy, wind power market, which is quite large by international standards. So I think there's some area for both sides to explore. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say that is Taiwan prepared to make the regulatory changes they need to? We're hopeful that they will. There are some unilateral changes that they can make. We're working also with businesses and with the AmCham Taipei to look at what changes we would like to see from a U.S. perspective, from a U.S. business perspective. Yes, we're hopeful. It remains to be seen, but we will continue to work with Taiwan to look at what needs to change in order to make the environment conducive to U.S. businesses.
Terrific. Just since I mentioned at the beginning, the gentleman who offered his introduction, Representative Lee, was an expert, seemed to be an expert in this area, but also, of course, is a leading representative for Taiwan in the United States. And we have the luxury of you being here. And I don't know if you want to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Taiwan's regulatory environment, which seems to be a theme that people mentioned. It's a little unfair of me to ask. But if you'd like to, if you'd want to talk about the regulatory environment or where you think Taiwan's economy is going or other things that you've heard, I'd invite you, totally welcome to do so. You have the microphone?
I think Taiwan has demonstrated its resolution to join the TPP and conduct a complete review of its regulations to meet the high standard of the TPP agreement. So the panelists talk about the regulatory review. I think Taiwan government has made some progress in this process, including the adaptation of by the parliaments on the trade secrets law, and also upgrading the IP intellectual property rights protection by setting the court. So things like that is moving on, and I think that will be very helpful for Taiwan become a responsible and a reliable partner in the semiconductor or other high-tech industry cooperation. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much. It was really unfair of me, but I really appreciate it. Let's go here to the gentleman in the fourth row along the edge.
My name is Dave Keegan. I'm over at the State Department Foreign Service Institute. The Thai government has announced, as previous governments have done in Taiwan, that they want to diversify Taiwan's economic linkages. They want to move south policy and so forth. But the IT industry in Taiwan is very tightly tied in, remains very tightly tied in to the Chinese productive base and the Chinese market. As China makes it clear that they want to develop a IT industry that is uniquely Chinese and that is independent of foreign producers. Does that pose a threat to Taiwan moving forward and to the survival of that industry?
Okay, terrific. Jimmy, you want to go first?
I mean, I think as Doug and others have mentioned, Taiwan's actually done very well in competing with mainland China. You know, many of the sectors are complementary to each other. Many are suppliers or customers to Chinese companies, and there are also signs that some Taiwanese investors like Foxconn may consider major investments in India and other emerging markets in South Asia, and that would be, you know, certainly consistent with what the Thai government seems to be promoting for the southbound investment policy. But for you know, that's a whole other conversation we could talk about in terms of what India needs to do to step up its infrastructure to be able to support ICT manufacturing. Still a little ways off from where they really need to be. So, thanks.
I think if you look at the ICTs as a commodity product, then you may come to the conclusion that it's become difficult for Taiwan to compete with China in that categories of products. But since there are new application of the ICT technologies in lots of areas we just mentioned, so there are always ways or some market segments for individual country to get involved in. In addition, I think the development of the new ICT area has something to do with the new ecosystem, even platform. You simply look at the case of the Shenzhen, the rise of Shenzhen in the so-called drone areas. It seems Dajiang has been the major players in drone. It surges, you know, overnight and capture more than about 60 or 70% of the global markets. It benefits a lot from the technology platform provided by Intel. So what I try to say is that in certain areas, of course, China has its own strengths. But in other areas, they may be involved in some kinds of niche or customized application. Taiwan can still play certain roles, as long as we keep a very close and open innovation partnership with the global major players. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add on one thing before we go take the question in the front on this issue of money and does Taiwan have enough money and thing that's mentioned before. I personally think that that's not a huge problem, because if you just look at most business deals, most investments, usually the funding comes from a whole variety of different sources. There are very complex transactions that occur. One doesn't need to just simply go into their own checking account or savings account to make any deal when you're buying a large company. And so if Taiwanese were interested in making a large acquisition, they could certainly go to Wall Street, London, or many of the other existing partners to do this. So I think that although it's some have more resources just sort of in their back pocket, money is something that can always be found. I have a difficulty myself finding it, but I think companies themselves, that's probably less of a, I think it's an overcomable challenge. Right here.
John Zan with CTI TV of Taiwan. As Deputy Representative Lee just mentioned, Taiwan has expressed a very strong interest in joining the TPP. Now, whenever Taiwan talks about the TPP, the USTR would say, hey, you need to resolve that old issue of pork import. Now, is there anything similar to pork in the ICT area that the U.S. would like Taiwan to do, apart from regulatory reforms? The question is addressed to Mr. Lan and to Lauder. Thank you. Or do you would still insist on pork import as a, well, that's, also fair.
Well, I'm not going to, of course, USTR it speaks for the United States government on those issues, and they would be able to identify the priorities in that area, especially within the context of TPP. I don't have a specific issue of the two to bring up comparable to the pork issue you mentioned, but I think you already understand what USTR's position is on that question, so I don't think I can go much farther beyond that.
I really don't. I don't have anything. There's nothing like pork that I can think of that is such a small part of the overall trade relationship that's taken up such a large space in discussion. So, I'd be happy to talk with you further on that, but I can't think of anything right now.
I mean, I can add, not from the perspective of a challenge, but an opportunity, is, if you look at the exports to Taiwan from the United States, services is a major export. And if you look in the digital economy, a lot of that's facilitated by cross-border trade and data flows. Taiwan's part of the trade and services agreement talks, and there's some real innovative, hopefully, principles that will be developed there that are similar to those in the TPP. So Taiwan's already part of discussions that will help lay the groundwork eventually, if Taiwan is interested in the TPP, to be able to make some of the commitments they would need to do that, to be promoting the digital economy within that context. And that would be cross-border trade in digital, cross-border data flows for digital services, which is very important to Taiwan because of the strength of its services industry.
Hi, I'm Dahlia Peterson, U.S.-China Commission. So China in 2014 created a massive private equity fund to have a M&A push in the semiconductor industry in Taiwan. So in what way is Taiwan balancing both its economic and its national security interests in light of this fact? Thank you.
Shenhong? Or Jimmy, both of you, or Doug.
Jimmy, okay,
Doug
yeah.
as well.
I think Jimmy is the expert in that area. Merger and acquisition now has a major instrument to Chinese industry developments. A lot of countries face the same problems, especially for Taiwan. So somehow the government's positions will affect how the decision will be made. But my own personal opinion is instead of just zero-sum game, we can try to work out solution. you know. I mean, this solution between 0 and 1. Maybe we can allow them to make some investment in Taiwan or acquire some Taiwanese companies' stake, but somehow under certain condition, which should be subject to negotiation between the two sides. I think that's a very regular practice by the United States or even by many other governments. At least that's my own personal views about this issue.
I mean, I think stepping back a little bit, the topic of M&A in the semiconductor industry is a global one. Last year saw record consolidation worldwide. More than $100 billion in semiconductor M&A took place in the United States, in Europe, and Japan, and Taiwan has been part of that as well. And so, certainly Chinese investors have made a lot of headways, but the majority of M&A activity has been done by non-Chinese companies in the global industry. So you had Intel buying Altera, Freescale being sold to NXP. Just alone, from our perspective, the membership composition has changed dramatically over the last year. And so I think Taiwan, needs to find and understand how it's going to play a role in the consolidation that's happening worldwide. All parts of the supply chain are consolidating from the packaging industry. So there was a feud between Taiwan's two largest semiconductor packaging firms, ASE and SPIL, over Chinese investment or not Chinese investment, working together or not working together, and the government stepped in. It bled through both administrations. ASML, the world's largest equipment company that makes lithography to help print chips, is buying a Taiwanese semiconductor company that makes packaging equipment. So what's Taiwan going to do? They really haven't been very active themselves in M&A globally. Whether or not that's globally, the M&A has seen indications that it might be petering out worldwide, but there hasn't yet been a final determination there. But we certainly have all been reading the headlines over Tsinghua Uni Group's proposed investments into Taiwan, into PowerTech, a packaging company, into ChipMOS, another packaging firm. And there's been other discussions, and they've recently filed an application with the Cross Straits Investment Commission for those to be reviewed as a package of investments. So now the decision really is up to the new Taiwan government around how to approach those investment decisions, and those are for the Taiwan government to consider, not for the industry. But it's certainly a huge topic. I don't know if Doug, you want to elaborate a little bit on where you might see that going.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I don't think, I find it highly implausible that the Taiwanese government will let any asset they view as valuable be controlled. There may be some investment, but controlled, majority ownership by Unigroup or any other of these mainland Chinese entities. Particularly now, I mean, the political party that might have been viewed as more amenable to investment from mainland China is basically in the process of collapse. So the political debate in Taiwan now seems to be being between the really anti-China and somewhat moderately anti-China groups. So I don't see that going forward. But also on the Chinese side, I mean, maybe Jamie feels differently, or I don't know if you can comment publicly on this, but I'm struck by how unsophisticated the people running the central government IC fund are. It's just, by and large, I mean, the way they actually make decisions, there may be a few people in it who know what they're doing, but the way that they're very constrained because, as always in China, there's worries about, 国产流失, losing state assets. They don't want to waste all this money, but in the very fact of all that, they often don't make very wise investment choices. Plus, there's just the sheer fact of how much money is present. I'm skeptical there will be good outcomes here. There might be a better outcome with XMC for other reasons because it's in the memory area. But in terms of M&A and broad and whether they're making judicious acquisitions or just driving up the price for acquisitions globally, I would side on the latter.
So I think to add on that, as Professor Chen mentioned, that currently there's a belief that China, in some areas, for example, in the semiconductor industry, appears to be pursuing a zero-sum strategy of all-out win over their foreign competitors, particularly in this sector. Certainly China should be able to develop its semiconductor industry. It makes sense for them to develop a semiconductor industry, given that they themselves have constraints on economic growth, on pollution, and they're struggling to move up the value chain. I think from my conversations with the Taiwanese semiconductor industry, with the U.S. semiconductor industry, are that China needs to build its industry in a way that's consistent with how others have built it, that's market-based, that's transparent, where instead of government planners and the National IC Fund deciding they will plop $40 billion into a memory company because they want a memory company, is not necessarily the best way to build an industry. And even if they aren't successful, that could have dramatic negative impacts on the global industry, given what we've seen, for example, in the LED, solar, wind, flat panel, high-speed train. You can name the number of industries that have, in China, had been seen significant negative impact due to non-market investment. It was not based on market demand, but government bureaucrat wishes that led to overcapacity, and has led to a number of industries like the LED industry in Taiwan, in the United States, or the LCD flat panel industry in Korea and Taiwan, now struggling to maintain their bottom line because of non-market-based overinvestment that the Chinese provinces really led to, not the central government. If you talk to the central government in China, they actually want to avoid that, but knowing the dynamics between the provinces and the central government, they don't always get the wish that they have, and they can't really fully coordinate everything that happens in China.
Terrific. This has been an amazing discussion. I can't tell you how much I've learned from it. I think what's amazing, it's in one way the irony, it's been mentioned several times, that Taiwan's limited resources, a small island, actually those end up being strengths, because it requires you, in order to survive, to use your brain power, your human capital, to think of smart ways. Not you can't sell oil or other things, So it's actually quite interesting that many of the most innovative places in the world are places that actually have those resource constraints, but have the right melding of politics, policy, collaborations, international partnerships, and I think we've seen that in ICT. So I walk away more optimistic than I did coming in, but at the same time there's substantial challenges, that there's many difficulties still to overcome. But I take away from the trips I've made to Taiwan, including most recently the first time I was in Taiwan is in the 1980s, and talking to companies, they are so far ahead of me, and most of the time ahead of government officials in identifying what the problems are and what the solutions are. And so it's that communication between industry and government within the island, and then between Taiwan and elsewhere, where I think you're going to see Taiwan find those niches, those custom areas where they're still going to be able to do well, not just in spite of what China's doing, because of what China's doing, and the changes in the sector. So I actually is still more optimistic than I had been in a while, and sometimes looking at domestic politics in different places, whether it's the U.S. or Taiwan, sometimes people can get extremely pessimistic, and so I actually leave more hopeful today than I did at the beginning. Let me thank my colleagues in the Freeman Chair who helped today, Nikki, Marina, and Brian, who did the large lifting for organizing today's event. They're super helpful with everything that we do. I want to thank Deputy Representative Lee, for participating in today's discussion and for TechRo's partnership with CSIS. And I also want to thank, of course, our fantastic panelists who have come from near and far to offer extremely important comments and insights that have moved the conversation along quite a bit of ways. So if everyone in the audience would please join me in thanking our panelists and everyone today.